Okay, so everyone get ready because today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to dive into a potential future, a what-if scenario, and it really hits close to home because we're going to think about what could happen after the current conflict ends.
That's a really interesting question. What we're going to be looking at is the period right after a ceasefire is declared, that transition period. And it could last a surprisingly long time, like 1.5 to 2 years.
Really? Wow. That's longer than I would have thought. I think most of us would picture, celebrations, everyone going home. But you're saying it's not that simple.
Not at all. You're absolutely right. It's way more complicated than that. That initial period, the immediate aftermath, it's such a complex process and it just drags on and on. Okay, so think about this. The ceasefire is declared. One of the very first things that has to happen is troop relocation. That by itself is a huge logistical undertaking.
Right, moving all those soldiers and equipment. But what else is involved in this period? You mentioned it could take up to 2 years.
Yeah, so at the same time, you've got damage assessments and investigations going on. Then there's clearing mines and unexploded bombs. Really dangerous stuff. And of course, the sad reality is you have to recover bodies and equipment. All of that takes time.
It's hard to even imagine all of that happening at once. And it's crazy to think that an independent Ukraine has never had to go through this before.
That's right. There's no rule book for this. They're going in blind. And we have to remember that this wouldn't be a peace with clear resolutions. It's more likely that the current lines would just hold. So there's so much potential for tension and animosity. It's not going to be a clean break.
Yeah, like everyone's just waiting to see what happens next, holding their breath.
Yeah.
And speaking of waiting, I think most people would assume that the soldiers would be sent home once the fighting stops.
I think that's a natural assumption, but it's not likely to happen very quickly. For one thing, that 1,700-kilometer front line still has to be secured. Even with a ceasefire, they're estimating that you'd still need about 240,000 troops to maintain security.
240,000? That's a lot of people. So why would you need so many if there's no active fighting?
Well, you have to think about the soldiers who have already been serving, some of them for years, under intense pressure. They're going to need to be rotated out. And that means you need replacements ready to go.
So even during peacetime, there would be this constant cycle of deployment and rotation. I wonder, though, would there even be enough people willing to volunteer, especially after everything that's happened?
That's a good question, but there's another factor that could really mess things up. The possibility of mass desertion. Once the immediate threat is gone, some soldiers might feel like they don't need to stay, that their service is over, and they might just leave. And that could really impact their ability to maintain security and complete those essential tasks after the war is over.
So it's not as simple as declaring peace and everything magically goes back to normal. There are all these challenges, from troop logistics to unrest in the ranks.
Exactly. And those challenges go way beyond just the military. We have to remember that this is a society that has been under tremendous pressure and uncertainty for years now.
That's right. We can't forget about the impact on everyday people. How are they going to cope with this transition?
Well, imagine this. A whole nation holding its breath for years. And then finally they can exhale. But that exhale, it could turn into this huge outpouring of frustration and anger. As the wartime restrictions are lifted, we could see all these emotions and demands coming out.
What kind of demands are we talking about?
Well, think about the veterans and their families. They've sacrificed so much. And they're going to want their voices heard. They'll be demanding recognition, support, answers. We could see protests, demonstrations, maybe even soldiers who are still in uniform speaking out.
So even without active fighting, there's still a high chance of unrest and instability.
Exactly. And then you have to think about all the issues that were put on hold during the conflict. Those are going to come rushing back, putting even more pressure on the government. And on top of all of that, there's the widespread psychological trauma and the need for support systems, which are pretty inadequate right now.
It's a really complicated situation with challenges at every level of society. And then there are the families that have been separated for years, with some of them building new lives abroad. What's going to happen to them?
That's a huge question that doesn't seem to be getting enough attention. On the one hand, there's going to be a lot of pressure to reunite families. Some people will be urging soldiers to join their families overseas. But on the other hand, if soldiers aren't allowed to leave, the resentment could be enormous, especially if their families are already settled somewhere else.
It's a tough situation with no easy answers. And it really highlights how war affects everything, not just the battlefield. It touches every part of life. But these ripples, they don't stop at national borders, do they?
No, you're absolutely right. This conflict has global implications, and the major world powers are watching closely. Each one has their own agenda.
Speaking of agendas, Our sources are suggesting that a prominent U.S. figure, maybe even a former president, has a plan to end the war. And this plan will be revealed at a big international conference.
Yeah, and the timing of this is really interesting. It might coincide with an important date, like Easter or some historical anniversary. Just to add to the drama, we also have to consider the possibility that information will be released strategically, even before the announcement.
Wait, you mean like leaks to the press?
Exactly. Politicians don't usually just make sudden pronouncements. They like to use these carefully crafted narratives and leaks to see how the public reacts and control the conversation before they make anything official.
It's all about controlling the narrative, even when it comes to peace. So tell me, what could this plan actually mean for the people listening right now?
Now, remember, we're getting into speculation and analysis here, not confirmed facts. But based on what we know, I think it's safe to say that a lot of people believe this plan won't include getting back all of the lost territories.
Right. That's the big question, isn't it? What are they willing to compromise on? What will peace actually cost?
And beyond the territory, there are other concerns. For example, downsizing the military could leave a lot of veterans without jobs and without a sense of purpose. The economic hardship of rebuilding will probably affect people's livelihoods and opportunities for years to come. And then there's the possibility of continuing political instability and uncertainty, which would cast a long shadow over the future.
So even if the fighting stops, the struggle isn't really over. Rebuilding isn't just about buildings and infrastructure. It's about rebuilding trust and hope and a sense of shared purpose.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another really important aspect, the psychological cost. We've talked about the physical and logistical challenges. But what about the less tangible but equally important psychological impact of war and what comes after?
It's true. The scars of war run deep. How can people even begin to heal from that kind of collective trauma?
It's important to understand that fear and the need to feel safe can really influence people's decisions. They might cling to things that are familiar even if they're harmful or don't work anymore, just because they're afraid of the unknown.
So it's like choosing the devil you know over the one you don't.
Yeah, kind of. A lot of people might prefer to stay in a state of fear because a truly free and uncertain future is just too much to handle.
That's a really difficult thing to think about. And it makes me wonder, after all these years of broken promises and manipulation and power struggles, can anyone listening really trust any leader or any plan?
It's a valid question. It reflects how trust has been eroded after years of political games and self-serving agendas.
It feels like everyone's playing this high-stakes game and you don't know who to believe.
Yeah.
But then what's the alternative? If not this plan, then what?
That's the challenge, isn't it? We have to acknowledge that the proposed solutions are flawed, but we still need to find a way forward. It's about recognizing that the future is uncertain, but it's not set in stone. The choices that people make, individually and collectively, will determine what happens next. And that's really where you come in, the listener. While we can offer our thoughts and analysis, it's really up to each person to take that information, form their own opinions, and be part of the conversation. Make your voice heard.
It's about taking control of your own future, instead of just sitting back and watching things happen. It means thinking differently and questioning things. And yeah, maybe getting a little uncomfortable with what you find.
Exactly. That discomfort can really help you grow and understand. For example, have you thought about how this war ending could change the way we think about aid and grants and global influence?
That's a really interesting point. We tend to focus on the big political stuff, but the changes to culture and our psychology are just as important.
Right. There's this idea going around that maybe a lot of the aid money that was sent to certain countries, like maybe 2/3 or even 3/4, it never actually got to where it was supposed to go.
Wait, are you saying that billions of dollars just disappeared?
Well, not necessarily vanished, but the suggestion is that it was diverted, siphoned off through all these layers of bureaucracy and inflated expenses. It's like the system was set up to look good rather than actually make a difference.
That's a pretty serious accusation. If that's true, who would benefit from something like that?
Well, some people are saying that there's this whole network of individuals and organizations, a lot of them acting like moral authorities or experts. They use their influence to get this money, but it came with strings attached. You know what I mean?
Like they had to promote certain narratives or support specific political agendas or even silence anyone who disagreed with them.
Exactly. It's like this whole shadow game of power and control. They use aid as a weapon to get the outcomes they want and shape how people see things.
It's crazy to think about. And here's the ironic part. The people who claim to be fighting for democracy and freedom could be the ones who benefit the most from the system of control.
Right. Because it keeps them in power, gives them access to resources and influence on a global scale. It's all about self-preservation.
So what happens when their power is threatened? Like if there's a change in government or a shift in global priorities, how do they react?
Well, you see them lashing out, making threats, trying to discredit anyone who disrupts their little system, anything to hold on to power.
So they try to make anyone who questions them look bad, like they're naive or uninformed or even dangerous.
Yeah.
They play on people's fears and anxiety.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining control. Well, what if people start to see through it? What if they realize that the stories they're being told are just carefully constructed lies meant to benefit someone else?
That's the risk.
Yeah.
The risk of getting exposed, of people waking up and seeing the truth about how power really works. And that realization can be both freeing and terrifying.
It's like suddenly realizing that the world is way more complicated than you thought. There are hidden agendas and power struggles everywhere, and everyone's fighting to control the narrative.
And the truth becomes a weapon in that fight. That's why it's so important to question everything, to dig deeper, to look past the surface and understand why you're being told certain things.
Don't just accept what you hear. Do your own research. Consider different viewpoints, and be ready to challenge your own assumptions. That's how you get to the truth.
And the truth can set you free, as they say. But it might make you uncomfortable along the way.
That's right. That discomfort, that willingness to question and challenge, that's what makes you a critical thinker. Someone who's not going to be manipulated.
So how do you avoid being manipulated?
Yeah.
How do you navigate this crazy world of information warfare and shifting alliances and hidden agendas?
It all comes down to understanding that you have power. Your choices, your actions, even your thoughts, they all matter. You don't have to just consume information. You can actually shape your own reality.
Okay, I like that I'm feeling empowered. So let's bring it back to our post-war scenario.
Yeah.
How does critical thinking work in that context?
It means asking the hard questions, like who benefits from this peace plan? Who's really in control of the economy? Who's shaping the narrative of what it means to move forward? You have to be skeptical.
Don't just get caught up in the feel-good talk. You have to think about the real-world impact of every decision, every policy, every promise that's made. Look past the surface.
Exactly. Because sometimes the most dangerous lies are the ones that sound hopeful. The ones that promise things will go back to normal, even though that's impossible. You have to see through that.
So ending the fighting is just the first step. You have to understand the terms of the peace, who has the power, and what the long-term consequences will be, both the ones they plan for and the ones they don't.
And you have to remember that the war ending doesn't mean the struggle is over. It might just be the start of a whole new chapter, one that needs even more vigilance and critical thinking and a willingness to challenge authority.
It's like everyone's waiting for things to calm down, but they never really do. There's always something going on beneath the surface.
And that's where trust becomes so important. Who do you trust to guide you through all of this? Who's shown that they're committed to the truth and being transparent and looking out for the people they represent?
That's a really tough question, especially after so many years of broken promises and lies. It's like you have to become your own expert, your own source of truth. You can't rely on anyone else.
That's the challenge and the opportunity. We have to take back our power, learn to think critically, and demand better from our leaders.
Because leadership isn't just about giving orders or making promises. It's about earning trust and encouraging open discussion and giving people the power to shape their own futures. That's what real leadership looks like.
And that kind of leadership is hard to find, but it's so important if we want to navigate the complexities of a post-war world, or any world for that matter. We need wisdom and courage and a commitment to a better future.
Well said. So, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. Don't underestimate your own voice, your own perspective, your own ability to think for yourself and challenge the status quo. It's easy to feel a little overwhelmed by all of this. The potential for unrest, the economic uncertainty, the psychological impact. It's kind of a bleak picture.
Yeah, it's true. The challenges are huge. It's tempting to just give up and despair. But even with all of this complexity, there's always room for hope. The possibility of change is always there. It starts with recognizing that you have agency, choosing to be aware and demanding better from those in power.
I like that. Choosing to be aware. Taking responsibility for understanding the situation instead of just letting things happen.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe in this future we're talking about leaders who actually care about people, who prioritize truth and transparency. Maybe they'll step up. Maybe the old systems of corruption and manipulation will finally fall apart and something better will take their place. It's worth fighting for.
It definitely is. We can't just sit around and wait for someone else to fix things. We have to be part of building the world we want to see. And on that note, I want to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the complexities of a potential post-war world. I know it's a lot to take in, but I hope it's given you some new ways of thinking about things and encouraged you to really think critically about the forces that are shaping our world.
Remember, knowledge is power, but it's only really effective when we use it to make decisions, have real conversations, and hold those in power accountable.
The future isn't set in stone. It's like a blank canvas waiting for people who can imagine a better world and have the will to make it happen.
It's about recognizing that even small actions can make a difference. By having thoughtful conversations, questioning what you're told, and supporting those who are working for positive change, you're contributing to a brighter future.
Absolutely. It's about each of us doing what we can, where we are, with what we have. And one of the most important things we can all do is stay informed, keep learning, and never stop questioning.
That's exactly what we try to do here on the Deep Dive. We want to give you the knowledge and perspectives you need to navigate this complex world and make informed choices.
So if you found this deep dive interesting, please share it with others. Keep the conversation going. And never stop searching for the truth.
Because a world where people are informed and engaged and have the power to shape their own destinies, that's a world worth fighting for. And that's a future we can all help create.
Well said. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep asking questions and keep pushing for a better world.
Remember, every challenge is also an opportunity. Let's make the most of the opportunities we have.
Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear.